I welcome everyone on behalf of lecture series on constitutionalism. Today is the third lecture of the keynote address by Professor Bhargava. The topic for the day is Constitutional Secularism, Part 2. And I would So the topic for the day is Constitutional Secularism Part 2. And I would thank Professor Bhargava for being here and also Mrs. Tani Bhargava for uh, accompanying Professor Bhargava till Nalsar. I would expect to be a more engaging lecture than yesterday. And Professor Bhargava is also willing to talk to students even after the lecture till the convention center. And with this, I would request Professor Bhargava to start off with the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what I'll do is first represent the content of yesterday's lecture in a different way, just to remind everybody of what I said. And after that, I shall offer some self-criticism, which would hopefully lay the basis of our discussion, for deepening our discussion. So let me begin the story of Indian secularism by portraying what we can call the social imaginary in India. This is an imaginary in which diversity is seen to be part of the landscape. It's almost a part of the natural landscape. There is deep diversity. And for thousands of years, you can go back to the Vedic period where there are multiple gods and goddesses, and each god is invoked for a special occasion. And in one way, this is something which is still continuing, right? But it's not just the multiplicity of what we later begin to call polytheistic gods and goddesses, but there's also Upanishadic thinking, which I mentioned yesterday, which is also quite different from the Vedic ritualism. So you can actually, if there was some other world, it would be a different religion, but we call it we subsume it under the same rubric, right? Rubric of what we now call Hinduism. Then, of course, there are the teachings of the Buddha, which in some ways are closer to the Upanishads. Then they are a very important critique of Vedic ritualism. There is Jain thinking, which is also different from Buddhists and from the Upanishadic and from the Vedic rituals. There are the early sort of arrival of or the presence of Syrian Christians. There are Jews. There are Parsis. There are different varieties of Islam coming from different parts of the world, not from any single source. They come from different, and they come with their own versions of Islam. And then there is later Christianity, and in the middle there is also the birth of new religious formations like Sikhism. So you can see that there is a very wide variety of religio-philosophical outlooks, religio-philosophical perspectives. These are different, and they cohabit. They all have self-confidence. They all have trust amongst each other. And there is no sense of alienation. They don't see each other as existential threats. There is no attempt by one group to eliminate the other group, right? This kind of diversity is accepted by not only people within India, but also people outside India. I mean, I remember the sociologist Max Weber making a remark in the early 20th century that this is something unique about India. He used the word tolerance. And this is a term that is used very often even today. We actually call Hinduism tolerant, but actually it's a whole variety of religious philosophical outlooks that accepted this tolerance. It's not just Hindu faith, but other faiths as well. And yesterday I was talking, towards the end of my lecture, I was talking about how people they had multiple allegiances, multiple attachments. They were moving from one to the other. All kinds of people, if you can group them together as believers or practitioners of multiple gods and goddesses, or of one god, or of or people believing in no god at all of them live together, right? Now, this condition, this social condition of multiple religious philosophical perspectives, this was broken asunder with what I called yesterday the religionization of India. A new category of religion arrived I mean, there were bits and elements of it which are present earlier. It's not as if it was entirely new, but it was given a new form of that arrived, and it became dominant. And this is an idea where when you talk about religions, you're talking about large formations of discrete entities which are hostile to one another, or at least which are in rivalry with one another. And so each person belongs to one or the other group, and each group is distrustful of the other. It's suspicious of the other. It is certainly got a competitive relationship, a deeply competitive relationship, if not an antagonistic one. So there is some degree of hostility, and people are claiming to belong to one or the other. And in fact, the spokesperson or the leaders of one group are trying to take various people into their fold, as opposed to others who are in a different fold. Now, as I said, it's not as if some of this didn't exist earlier. In fact, there were sects even earlier. And there were some degree of conflict and some violent skirmishes. But it's like, the temperament generally, I would say, was such that people fought and then they came back together. They didn't hold grudges against each other, deep-rooted grudges against each other. It's not as if I said they didn't see each other as existential threats. When you see the other as an existential threat, you want to get rid of them. And you feel at home in the world only if the others are not present, right? Now, that is not a condition. There were differences, there were some conflicts, there were violent skirmishes, but because of this largest pluralist imaginary, these differences remained, but they never turned into hostile conflicts of the kind that we see in the late 19th or early 20th century. Now, when this religionization, which is often called communalization, and this religion is actually communal. All religions which see this religion, the category of religion itself is the communal is built into this notion of religion, right? If you competitive, rivalrous groups, if that is what religions are, and religious identities are categorical and mutually exclusive, then you can say that communal, in some way, communalism is built into this idea of religion. Now, when this happened and conflict became very violent, and particularly with the idea of ethno-nationalism, that a whole nation has to have this be defined by religion, and each nation must have a state of its own, then of course it was all hell broke loose. And it is at that time, when things of this kind were happening, that Gandhi came up with this idea of communal harmony, which was later translated, you can say, if in the modern language of secularism, You can say that it's a form of secularism in which Gandhi believed that the state must be separated from all religions. And actually, Gandhi talked about quite strict separation of the American life, variety. I spoke yesterday about it. Strict separation of, so that the state is in a position to both control religious hostility and to enable fraternity between communities. Now, that is a unique idea which was simply not associated with secularism earlier in Europe. Europe did not have, Europe had homogeneous nation states. It had already, in very ethically undesirable ways, eradicated diversity and heterogeneity from their nation, from their localities. So they were. This may come as a surprise to you, but you must take my word for it. In Europe, there were already homogeneous nation states from which, not only that, I mean, they were Christians of a certain kind. So England became Anglican. The whole of the Scandinavians became Lutherans. Denmark became Calvinist. So it was not just that they did not tolerate other religions like Muslims and Jews, but they did not even tolerate denominations or sects of their own religion. They just threw them out. So, and this is because the idea of religion as a well-demarcated community with exclusive allegiance, so it cannot tolerate other people, right? And I said that this is something which is absent in Asian imagination, in Indian imagination, but it becomes consolidated in the first half of the 20th century in India, which leads, of course, to the partition of the country. And those people who are left behind in when the whole subcontinent was divided, fewer in Pakistan from the very beginning than in India, where you had India had 25% Muslim population before partition, and it was reduced to about 13% after the partition. So 50% of the Muslims left, some to the east and some to the west. But the rest of them remained. They were scattered all over. It's impossible to uproot people. The Tamil Muslims were Tamil speakers. Many of the southern people living in South India did not even know what was happening. This is something which is concentrated in the north and the east. The rest of the country, many people did not even, it wasn't felt as a very intense experience. So they didn't care very much. And a large number of Muslims remained. But the fact is that the idea that you need a strong secular state in order to reduce, if not eliminate, what I call inter-religious domination. The domination by one religious community of members of other religious communities, that has to be prevented, and so you need this. But there is another thing which was also, the prospect of that also became very strong, and that is something which was brought out very well by Dr. Ambedkar. I'll quote from him, if I can find the quote. Just a minute. I think I should be able to. Yeah. He's because when the I call it the majority minority syndrome. The majority minority syndrome is makes two religious communities go into a spiraling alienation, and they see each other as enemies, right? This is not natural, but that is what happens. Now, Ambedkar pointed out when that happens, another thing happens. And that other thing is, I'll quote, when people regard each other as a menace, all energies are spent on meeting this menace. The exigencies of a common front against one another generates a conspiracy of silence over social evils. Internal dissent and conflict is squashed in favor of the idea that everyone must close ranks or the community would weaken. In other words, in the 19th century, a lot of reform movements had begun in India, which were inspired by ideas of freedom and equality, both freedom and equality. linked reforms. But when you have when communal harmony is disturbed, and when communities start seeing each other as enemies, Ambedkar says that a lot of time is invested in just meeting this common enemy. And in order to present yourself as one, you paper over internal differences, internal dissent, and all reforms that you want to introduce within your community, they are given up. So when you are not making your own community egalitarian, or if you are not freeing members of your own community, then what happens? Remember yesterday I had mentioned that there are prospects of intra-religious domination. Caste hierarchies persist. Women within the communities, they're not able to emancipate themselves. All sorts of other new forms of inequalities develop. So India had to make sure that it has a state. I mean, it had a choice, either to have a religion-centered state or to have a secular state. And mercifully, in 1950, from 1947 onwards, through the constitutional debates, from 1950s onwards, India, without using the word secular, it opted not for a religion-centered state, not for a Hindu state, or for that matter, a Muslim state. Of course, that was an impossibility because a Muslim-centered state had already been born in Pakistan, right? But a Hindu, we didn't opt for a Hindu-centered state sensibly, we opted for a secular state. And when you have a secular state, you are alert to the possibility of inter and intra-religious domination. So you'll fight it. And you find that in your constitution, and I'll now come to the articles of the constitution. If you have the body of the copy of the constitution in front of you, I'll just go through them and then point out, just to substantiate the point that I was making, that there is the fight against intra-religious domination, the idea of principal distance in policy, and underlying this, the idea of critical respects towards all religions. That's what I said was at the core of, or what is really distinctive about Indian secularism. That is something that you can find in the Constitution, even when the word secular was not there. I'm going to the original. So here are the articles. First of all, Article number 5 of the Constitution, which talks about citizenship. Anybody who's born in India, or whose parents are born in India, is an Indian citizen. And regardless of course, that is sought to be changed now in the CAA and all that. But basically, the idea was that regardless of one's religion, you are you're a citizen of India. That's number one. That is what establishes India as a secular state, right? Religion is not relevant. That's impossible in a religion-centered state, where all that matters for citizenship is your religion. So even in Pakistan, of course, the fact that you were Hindu didn't make you into a non-citizen. But all rights were not given to Hindus and to Christians. So that's what makes India so different from Pakistan in its original conception. But anyhow, that's the first. Then you, of course, come to Article 14, which is a very important article, which is, of course, the right to equality before law. Now, here again, although religion is not mentioned, it's very clear. The state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. Any person, it could have said, but it didn't. It doesn't matter. It's implicit. Any person, regardless of his religion, creed, gender, race, so on, which is spelled out later. Then, very clearly, Article 15, that specifies what is meant by equality of law. No discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. And here, it's very clear, non-discrimination. So you have a citizenship which is inclusive, no exclusion on grounds of religion from the community, and once you're included, no discrimination. These are two different things. You can be included, but then once you're included, you can be discriminated against. A lot of the, in the Hindu community, people from different castes are sought to be included. But some castes are considered to be inferior and some superior. Now, that graded inequality is something which denies equality to people within the Hindu community. Now, if a Hindu state was there, and if it's, as I said yesterday, if it followed the laws of which were enshrined in the Brahminical Dharma Shastra, then we will have the same thing. But this is denied by the Article 15. No discrimination on grounds of religion. And very importantly, this had to be specified. No discrimination in access to shops, to public restaurants, in hotels and places of public entertainment, or the use of wells, tanks, bathing ghats, roads and places of public resort maintained wholly or partly out of state funds or dedicated to the use of general public. So the entire public life, in the entire public domain, no discrimination is permitted. Anything which has even 1 paisa of the state, of course, privately, meaning your homes, if you don't want some people, you may not have them. That's your right to privacy. So you can, that is something that the state cannot, I mean, that would be intrusion of the state in private affairs. But in public life, you cannot do it. Now, that's of course, very secular, right? Then we come to Article 16, which has to do with equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. Again, jobs, no discrimination in jobs, public jobs, government jobs, but also anything which has a public character. Of course, that is not always, this is a matter of ambiguity, and the courts have their own say on this matter, because government jobs is very clear. But which jobs are non-governmental, but take some aid from the government, but are really also privately owned, so their public character is ambiguous, there I would say that this article should apply. Whether it applies or not, I don't know. Article 17, abolition of untouchability. That's a direct intervention, some might say, in the Dharma Shastras, which are in the minds of some people. I don't believe that that is the heart of Hinduism. This is a text, please remember this. It's a text written in the 1st century after the Common Era. All of the Hindu practices before that were not legitimated like that. The Dharma Sutras are very ambiguous about Ashokan inscriptions in the 3rd century, and I'll talk about them tomorrow. Ashokan inscriptions do not even mention jati or varna. There is no mention of any of this. In the 1st century after the Common Era, you have the Manav Dharma Shastra, which is very forthright, very forceful, and about the legitimacy of the Varna system, Varnashra Dharma system. Now, there you have also, the first time there is a talk of the outcasts, and there's talk about pollution and purity, and therefore of untouchability. So it's a very old phenomenon. But remember, this is a text which is written by the Brahmins for Brahmins. It's telling other Brahmins that you must recognize untouchables as untouchables. Whether this was actually happening in society, one doesn't know. Probably it is happening. But whether it is only done by Brahmins or whether it is done by everybody, very, very unclear. You have to look at other evidences. But yes, for Brahmins who were, but notice, there are Brahmins who are also Buddhists. There are Brahmins who have become Jains. What they were doing is Buddhism, I have to say, early Buddhists is not necessarily against the Varna system. I'm talking about first century. Huge number of people who are Buddhists. The great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna is not only a Buddhist but a Brahmin. So so he's born as a Brahmin. He probably does practice a little bit of Brahmin, but as a philosopher, he's a Buddhist philosopher. He believes in the Buddha. He follows the Buddha and so on. So, but anyway, I'm straying a bit. Point I'm making is that untouchability has been there for a long time, and it is legitimated and sanctioned by a very important Hindu text, namely the Dharma Shastras. And this can be seen by a large number of Hindus in the 20th century as a direct intervention in Hinduism. And this is not possible in the American secular structure. Because you remember, mutual exclusion. State cannot interfere in religion. If the state cannot interfere in religion in India, you cannot ban untouchability. But here, the constitution is banning untouchability. Abolition of untouchability. Okay? And any enforcement, the enforcement of any disability arising out of untouchability shall be an offense punishable in accordance with law. A criminal offense. So it's criminalized. Anybody practicing untouchability is a criminal who's going to be punished. Now, we know that it is still practiced in India. So it is something which happens, which is just, but we also know that a lot of progress has been made on this issue. It's not as if the account on one side is zero and the other side is full. There is some progress. We've made untouchability a big offense. But remember, it's been a slow progress. It could have been faster. Anyway, let's come to Article 25, which is the next relevant article. Maybe there are others, but 25 is which is the freedom of conscience and free profession of and free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. There is obviously some controversy about propagation of religion. We all know that, and we can discuss it. But this is, again, freedom by necessarily means that the state cannot interfere in this. Otherwise, people are not free to practice the religion, or free to profess religion, or free to propagate. Freedom means that freedom from. So this is a direct. You are free from the state, and you are free from other communities. So if people generally prevent you from practicing your religion, you can go to the court and say, my freedom of religion is being adversely affected. And certainly, the state cannot directly intervene in your practice. But of course, there is also another article here which says subject to public order, morality, and health, and so on. Now, this is a phrase that could be a little more precise, but the courts have then intervened to interpret it in different ways, and particularly the use of the word morality. I would say that it's I would say constitutional morality. I would say basic human, universal human ethic. But the court is, there are different ways of interpreting this word, and some excesses have been made, and you know about them better. I'll go back and read some of the stuff because now I've forgotten. When I first did some work, I'd closely examined some of this, but I just want to point to your attention to the fact that here you have both freedom, you have the state not interfering, but the state also interfering. And it seems to me negative interference in religion. If there is some disturbance of morality, which is clearly the case when you are banning, when you are treating other people as untouchables. You can say it's Hindu ethics. But the state can intervene in that morality, in that ethics, in that communitarian morality, in order to uphold the basic constitutional morality. In order to uphold human ethic, basic humanitarian ethic. So you can see that very clearly, this is principal distance, this is critical respect, all of this is present here, even though the words are not mentioned. But the concept is there. I intervene or I may not intervene. The state is telling itself. I have to look at this case, specifically. I may intervene, I may not intervene, depending upon whether it violates basic human morality, constitutional morality, or whether it upholds it. Freedom of religion is to be upheld if it doesn't violate. You cannot have human sacrifice, even if it's a part of your traditional religion. In some cases, it used to be. Or animal sacrifices in public, I don't think it's rarely practiced in India. It's not as if there are huge festivals. In Nepal, there is no such thing. I mean, it's getting less and increasing less so under pressure from animal rights groups and in the last 25 years. But even today, some years ago, I read in the newspaper, 10,000 buffaloes were butchered in public as part of Hindu tradition. Don't forget, Nepal is a very strong Hindu society. And this is something which is done by upper caste, slaughter of buffaloes. So in India, that's really quite impossible to do. We do not allow, we consider this not very moral, So, okay, then 26 is freedom to manage religious affairs. This is again freedom for two religious communities. This is a community right. It's not just an individual right. It's something, because what is there is that every group has the right to establish and maintain an institution for religious and charitable purpose. A group-specific right. You're giving a right to the group, a religious group. It's not, no individual can himself do it. You have to associate. You form a group and then you establish an institution. You cannot have, institutions are run by groups. They're not individually run. We know that. No university is run by a single individual. You can pray individually, but you cannot run a university on your own. You have to have a group. So this right, the right of, if university people have rights, they have rights as members of the university. They don't have rights qua human individuals. So this is also a right which is given to a community, to a group, to set up and to manage and so on. Anyway, 27 is again a freedom. You cannot compel any person to pay taxes which are used for any religious purpose. Very important, right? And also, not only can you not ask, supposing I believe in no God, and the state believes in some God, even if it's tolerant towards other gods and says, well, everybody has to pay taxes to all religious institutions, I can say no. You can't take taxes away from me for any religious purpose. According to Article 27, that is perfectly valid. But suppose worse, if there is a religion-centered state, one religion-centered state, let's say Islamic State, and Islamic State which runs in accordance with, it has all kinds of monopolistic privileges which are given to Muslim institutions. And I am a Christian living in that. Now, imagine if I have to pay, as a Christian, I would like to have that money to practice my own religion. I wouldn't like the state to take my money forcibly away from me in order to fund Islam. I wouldn't like to do that. Similarly, if you imagine if if the state becomes a Hindu state, and it imposes a tax on all peoples, both atheists, Christians, Muslims, and tells them that you have to pay 10% of your tax to all Hindu institutions. By the way, this was normal in Europe. In the 17th, 18th, even 19th century, it was normal. People paid taxes. Everybody had to pay a tax. And not to forget our own past. In some part, I don't know about pre-Islamic rule, but let's be honest, in some parts of ruled by Muslims, among some Muslim rulers, Hindus had to pay a poll tax, the jizya. That was a tax that they had to pay. Muslims didn't have to pay. That is a discriminatory tax. So we decided not to go that way. We were against our own past. Remember, Akbar is hailed because he abolished the jizya. But obviously there was jizya before that, which he abolished. We hail Akbar as a great proto-secular person because he abolished this tax. But we cannot celebrate those rulers who imposed this tax. So in the Constitution, we made it very clear, no such thing. No religion will be privileged, and no person living in this territory has to pay a tax to support a religion which is not his own. If he doesn't want to support any religion, she may not support it. She can, no tax will be, we tax for secular purposes. Build roads, build infrastructure, build whatever, schools, education institutions. So we don't say build a temple from my tax money. If you want to build a temple, do it with, I can pay, I have a right to pay to build a temple. Nobody is going to take it away from me. That right is there. I can build a temple. But the state will not forcibly take any money away from me to build a mosque or a temple. Right? That is 27. Then 28. Freedom as to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship. Now, I'll 28, 29, and 30. These are all rights which are given to religious communities. Again, it's to enable them. This is to help, not to disenable them, not to hinder, not to prevent, not to inhibit. It's not intervening in a harmful way, which, of course, only from their conservative interests they're harmful. But from the point of view of constitutional morality, it's not. Constitution allows you to intervene in order to reduce intra-religious and inter-religious domination. But the conservatives and the orthodox may feel it's terrible. My practices are being undermined. The upper castes who practice untouchability, not all, but those who practice untouchability will say, my God, brushed ho gaya sab kuch. ये अनटचेबल सब मेरे घर में आ गए, तो ये तो आपकी प्रॉब्लम है, आप सॉल्व कीजिए इसको, क्योंकि अब हमारा देश चेंज हो गया है. वो जमाना नहीं है जब आप ये बड़ी फ्रीली इसको प्रैक्टिस कर सकते थे. You understand Hindi? All of you? I hope you don't mind. When I talk about such matters, I sort of spontaneously break into Hindi. I could speak in English, but anyway, the point here is that all these. So, the right to establish educational institutions is a right not to hinder but to help. And so, as I explained yesterday with other examples, it's a right to enable religious communities who may feel vulnerable. We are able to do it. The majority community, the state is acknowledging that there's an implicit acceptance that there is a majority, but the state is basically telling its people, or we are telling ourselves, that although there is a group which is larger in number, it doesn't mean that it will dominate other groups. So it doesn't become majoritarian. It'll let the minority feel, live with dignity, members of live with, so it has to give some rights to the minority so that they also feel that they're living freely and with dignity in our society, even though they're small in number, right? So one of the ways in which we can do that is that you set up your own institution. We will not if the majority says you can't do it, the state will be there to protect you. That's the idea. This is not a great concession. It's not a privilege, but it's giving them confidence. Like you give any vulnerable person, potentially vulnerable person, some confidence. So this is something which we should discuss, this whole idea of appeasement. But anyway, in that institution that you set up entirely on your own, a religious community, this is a community specific right? A religious community can set up its own education institution. And in that school that is set up by a religious community privately, you can teach, you can have instruction, religious instruction. So you can have your, if there's a madrasa, you can have a mosque there. If you have a convent, you can have a chapel there. There are many Christian institutions which have their own little churches in the compound. So you can have that. But if you take even a single paisa from the state, this is the principle, right? Articles 28 to 30. If you take 1 paisa from the state, then you cannot discriminate in admission. So if a Hindu applies to a Christian school, you cannot just say that you are a Hindu, therefore you cannot enter the school. Because now it becomes a public institution, right? I made this point earlier. And here it is. No religious instruction shall be provided in any educational institution wholly maintained out of state funds. Meaning partially में हो सकता है, but wholly में नहीं हो सकता है. And no person attending any educational institution recognized by the state or receiving aid out of state funds shall be required to take part in any religious instruction that may be imparted in such institution, or to attend any religious worship that may be conducted in such institution, or in any premises attached thereto, unless such person, or if such person is a minor, his guardian has given his consent thereto. This is something that we can 100% verify. If there's anyone who's been to some school or whose parents have been to some school like St. Joseph or St. Anthony's or St. Xavier's or whatever, Carmel Convent or St. Mary's, if there's anybody sitting here who's ever been to any of these Christian institutions, you know that nobody can tell you that you must attend the chapel. You can go there voluntarily, but you cannot be forced, and you cannot be forced to read the Bible. Christians may be compelled, but no Hindu or Muslim or Buddha can be compelled. I've been in St. Stephen's College in Delhi. I was a student there. I also taught there. But I was never compelled to go to the chapel. The chapel was there. People went there. I didn't go even once. Not once. Nobody could compel me to go there. Nobody could tell me that I have to go to this chapel. And that is, so it's a mix. It's a community right to establish institutions, but it's my individual right to say no. It's balancing. It's very interesting. We have individual rights and community rights, and we balance them in a very interesting way. We are making them compatible with each other. Everybody talks about conflict between individual and collective rights, but there is no, here we balance them. And there's another interesting thing, which is there in Article 30 or, right. So, both in admissions and in instruction or worship, you cannot, so admission, you cannot be discriminated against, and you cannot be compelled to go. But every religious community can ask for funds, aid from the state. And the state has to give aid on a non-preferential basis. It cannot discriminate. So it cannot, if a Muslim school goes to the state and says, well, we want some money from you, then the state will have to be impartial, and if it meets whatever criterion is met by everybody, then it will give aid to them. But as I said, if aid is taken by that Muslim school, then in admission it cannot ask a Hindu not to, and it cannot force a Hindu in that school to take part in what is it? नमाज नहीं, ऐसा नहीं कर सकते. हिंदू रहेगा, पढ़ेगा, ऐसे बहुत हो सकते हैं. There can be some areas where there is Muslim domination, and there are Hindus and Christians there. Certainly in Kerala there are many, right? But if there's a very good school which is run by Christians or Muslims, Hindus can very well go there, but they will not be forced, right? This is not possible in a Hindu state or an Islamic state. I mean, if it's not that it's not possible, it's possible that it will be going against the principles of that religious-centered state. Okay, you can see that here how sensitive the Constitution is to inter-religious domination, how sensitive the Constitution is to intra-religious domination. Every time I talked about everything being open to all, regardless of gender, sex, it says, gender, regardless of caste, it's attacking gender-based injustices and caste-based injustices. When it's attacking, abolishing untouchability, opening public wealth, it is really attacking caste-based exclusions and injustices, right? So but it's also enabling. So critical respect to all religions. It's recognizing religious communities, saying, well, we recognize, we are not anti-religious, but we are against institutionalized religious domination, inter and intra. And that's the unique feature of Indian Constitution. Critical respect to all religion, neither anti-religion nor totally pro-religion, having a healthy critical respect, and therefore having a policy of principal distance. You engage in religion or you disengage from it. You engage negatively or positively, and you do it on a basis which is flexible, depending entirely upon which policy will enhance constitutional values and which policies you will adopt in case there are some practices which are undermining our constitutional morality, namely basic, freedom, equality, justice, fraternity, and so on. There is something which is not mentioned in the Constitution, which comes in the Representations of People Act later, very soon afterwards, in the early 50s. You know that. Enmity, or when, promoting enmity, which is direct attack on any attempt to have institutionalized inter-religious domination, hatred, violence, promoting violence against other religious communities, religious persecution. And particularly during democratic elections. Now, of course, it's in tatters. I don't know, nobody talks about that act. People's representation, I don't know what's happened. You should tell me what happened to it. Why is it not invoked? Because today, every election is full of these. Everybody is attacking other religious communities, particularly, Muslims. Let's face it. All kinds of attacks during elections. Targeting. But there is no action taken. It's illegal. It goes against the People of Representation Act. It's violative of the Constitution, but no action. Everybody silent. So we have abandoned the secularity of the state. We are a peculiar state right now, where in principle, in law, we are secular. In some practices, we continue to be, but it's the will of the government. Whenever it allows, it can do so. So anyhow, so let me come now to some of the how much time do I have? I think I've taken already 45 minutes. So I'll just mention the 5 issue problems and then come directly to the discussion. Today I'm sort of, I feel I've elaborated better than yesterday. Yesterday was a little abstract, but the ideas are more fully fleshed out today. But let me tell you about some of the problems. One problem is we have too readily accepted, even in the Constitution, the reading of the Constitution is such that we accept that there are religions which are demarcated from each other. I think there are a lot of people who don't live like that. And we are, in our judicial announcements and in our constitutional practice, we are overlooking that the Constitution allows for हिंदुस्तान में कोई लेक्चर कंप्लीट नहीं होता जब तक एक माइक आवाज ना उठाए, बुलंद आवाज कि मैं भी हूं मुझे देखो, मुझे सुनो। तो ये होता है कोई भी लेक्चर में। हाँ, ये बंद करा हुआ है पर फिर भी आवाज कर रहा है। इसकी आवाज बंद नहीं हो सकती, इसकी फ्रीडम है। माइक की आवाज को बंद करना मुश्किल है, उसको बंद करना मुश्किल ही नहीं, नामुमकिन है। Which is a dialogue from Dawn, isn't it? Okay, so one is, I think we should be a little more careful with this religionization, which is taking root in India and which is taking further root in India and so on. That's one. We should look this idea, which I have outlined today. I don't understand. I've been speaking about it for 30 years. My first piece on principal distance was in 1991. And it was published in 1994 in Economic and Political Weekly, which is an Indian magazine, not a foreign magazine. Today, it's 30 years. 1994, 2024. 30 years. But when I listen to pronouncements by the court, or I listen to other scholars, I do not see them talking about it. I have to admit, that if you look at literature abroad, they are talking about the distinctness of Indian secularism, about the idea of principal distance, and so on. But in India, very few people talk about it. I don't know why. Neither the courts, nor academics, nor people in general. I am the only one who propagates this idea. मैं अपना ही बैंड बजाता रहता हूँ, बंदर की तरह। प्रिंसिपल डिस्टेंस पर कोई सुनता ही नहीं है। हमारी अब ये सेक्युलरिज्म हिंदुस्तान की क्या है, ये नहीं समझते, उसको फॉर्मूला बनाते रहते हैं। लेफ्ट राइट दोनों ही, अपोनेंट्स प्रोपोनेंट्स आर बोथ, and there are some decent guys who keep saying that ये राजीव ने कॉम्प्लिकेट कर दिया है सारा मामला, ये बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेटेड। सेक्युलरिज्म बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है, लेकिन इसको कॉम्प्लिकेट कर दिया है। मैंने नहीं किया, एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने किया है। कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन is very, it relates to religion in a very complex and subtle way, because that is the reality. You cannot either treat religion as an untouchable, nor can you treat religion with great reverence and leave it. That's another form of untouchability. Neither forms, positive or untouchable. Neither taboo, ये इसको छू नहीं सकते, ये तो बहुत बड़ा है, या इसको छू नहीं सकते, ये बहुत छोटा है। रिलीजन दोनों ही नहीं, उसको आप ऐसे ट्रीट करिए। इट्स अ ह्यूमन आर्टिफैक्ट, ये हम लोगों ने बनाया है। अगर हम गॉड में बिलीव करते हैं तो गॉड ने रिलीजन नहीं बनाया, गॉड खुद ने अपने आप को बनाया, पर रिलीजन तो हम लोगों का बनाया हुआ है। तो अगर हमने बनाया है तो हम उसके साथ कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, और लोगों ने किया है। इतनी प्रोटेस्ट मूवमेंट्स हुई हैं यहाँ पर। वैदिक रिचुअलिज्म के खिलाफ बुद्ध ने खड़ी करी आवाज, रिचुअल सैक्रिफाइस के खिलाफ जैन्स ने आवाज खड़ी करी, और इतने सारे मूवमेंट्स होते रहे जिसको हम भक्ति बोल देते हैं। वो सारी भक्ति मूवमेंट्स में यही है, कितनी चीजों को अटैक किया और कितनी चीजों को रीडिफाइन कर दिया। और हमारा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, सारी सोशल रिफॉर्म्स मूवमेंट भी वही कर रहे हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन भी वही कर रहा है। और हम लोग अभी भी लेकिन जब बोलते हैं तो either we become secularism means anti-religion, या secularism is a strict wall of separation की। बट ऐसे अपने आप कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को पढ़ लीजिए, और अगर तब मुझसे बोलें कि आप गलत बोल रहे हैं तो मैं मानूंगा, नहीं तो आप जो मैं कह रहा हूं मान लीजिए, डोंट थिंक कि ये गलत बोल रहे हैं, आर्गुमेंट दीजिए। अच्छा, that's the second point. My third point is that very often, and this is now a criticism of people who are secular, please make a distinction between communitarian and communal. Religious communities are there, and people define their identities in terms of these religions, in terms of their religion. This is not the only identity. It should not be the only identity. Muslims are not only Muslims. There are a whole lot of other things. Hindus are not only Hindus, there are a whole lot of other. But there are also Hindus and Muslims. People may choose not to define themselves. That's also acceptable. मैं नहीं हूँ हिंदू. Why I'm not a Hindu? लिखा है किसी ने. नहीं होना चाहते तो मत हुए. आपकी ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आपको अधिकार दे रही है. बट अगर आप हिंदू बोलना चाहते हैं तो कहिए ना, क्यों, प्रॉब्लम क्या है? अगर आप मुस्लिम बोल रहे हैं वो भी ठीक है, क्रिश्चियन बोल रहे हैं तो भी ठीक है. That's communitarian. What is communal? Communalism is when you define your identity in such a way that it necessarily conflicts with the religious identity of the other. It's hostile. That is the modern notion of religion. Please, don't accept that idea of religion, which is necessarily communal. You can be proud as a Hindu for good things of Hinduism, but you don't have to be anti-Muslim. भाई क्यों? You can also respect something in Muslims. उनके पास भी कुछ है. मुस्लिम्स के साथ भी यही है. आपको मुसलमान बनना है तो बनिए, लेकिन उसके अंदर आपको एंटी हिंदू तो नहीं होना. क्रिश्चियन को भी यही. तो अगर आपके पास ऐसे रिसोर्सेज हैं जो आपको बोलते हैं कि आप हॉस्टाइल हो जाइए, तो आप उन रिसोर्सेज को कंट्रोल में रखिए. अगर कंट्रोल में नहीं रख सकते, अगर निकाल दीजिए तो बेहतर होगा. अपने डॉक्ट्रिन से निकाल दीजिए. वो आप आज के जमाने के लिए नहीं है. You're all right in religious homogeneous societies. अकेले आप रह रहे हैं कहीं तो आप कर दीजिए, अपना अपना बैंड बजाते रहिए. लेकिन अब आप साथ रह रहे हैं दूसरों के, तो आप पब्लिक सेंसिबिलिटी होनी चाहिए कुछ. आपके अगर डॉक्ट्रिन्स में लिखा है कि हेट द अदर, देन कट इट आउट मैन. लीव इट. There's no need to have it. Likewise, for every, so communal and communitarian में फर्क होना चाहिए. I would say one more thing, and this has been a problem among secularists. They've never thought that, they've assumed that if somebody is trying to be communitarian, he's automatically being communal. ऐसा नहीं. Likewise, in education institutions beyond a certain level, please, I would say, why don't we teach religion? Religion is not up. Religious instruction or religious education में फर्क है. No university, rightly according to the Constitution, no school, no university run by the state must have a place of worship. Must not instruct people in any religion. Correct. But to teach about religion, and to teach not one religion but all religions, who has prevented you from that? नहीं, अगर आप religion पढ़ाओगे तो लड़ाई हो जाएगी, या एक ही religion पढ़ाओगे. Please, these are problems that can be prevented. There is nothing given about it. If you teach religions in a particular way, in a communal way, then you will have problems. But if you make it Everybody designs their curriculum. There are teaching courses. You make sure that you teach about religion in a way where even when you are critical, you are being critical without really offending the other, without humiliating the other. Yes, inter-religious education will not be easy. It will make you will have critical remarks against each other. But we are adults. We learn to live with criticism. And we learn to criticize without offending people's basic human dignity. And people must learn to take it. And this is something, at least at the university level, we should. But because we've been so scared, and this scare we have borrowed from a Western idea of religion. We're so scared that we don't even have courses of comparative religion at any level in the universities. Why? I know this is risky, this is dangerous, but look at what's happening. If no public institution is teaching religion, look at what is society में एक दूसरे का religion के बारे में क्या नहीं कहा जाता. And people have no control, no regulation. Public के अंदर कम से कम we can all sit down and say, well, we will not accept this. But if private schools are doing it, and in society there is rumor mongering about each other's religion all the time, there's no control. Now, you don't implement the law, and you allow all kinds of religion, rumors about each other's religions to float around. Then what is happening? Let's think about it. At least let us consider this seriously. I'm for teaching not one religion, but all religions in an appropriate manner, rather than abandoning it to private agencies and I'm for teaching all, not one. Finally, I'm getting into democratic politics, and then I'll end. We have forgotten constitutional secularism, and secularism played no small role in diminishing its value because they haven't really understood it. This is a cry from the heart. Unfortunately, everybody has reduced constitutional secularism to what I call party political secularism. It's not just political secularism, it's party political secularism. Rajesh was talking about competitive communalism. In my first paper that I wrote on secularism in 1991, it was published in Frontline. This was the first public article I ever wrote. And then I wrote 5 articles then, and then I stopped. And then I revived in 2017, and finally I got a book out based on those 100 articles. Some of you might know, Between Hope and Despair, which has now been translated into Hindi. Sorry for being a little self-promoting myself, but I think this is not a promotion of myself, it's a promotion of a certain kind of ideas, and which I'm very happy to do. So I wrote, this was the first article I wrote, and this I mentioned, secular as multi-communal, competitive communalism. We have reduced secularism. So you pander to the many political parties, and not just one. Many political parties have pandered to the fanatical fringe of every religious community. That is Sarvadharma Sambhav has been reduced to that. So instead of we have forgotten the principles. We have reduced principal distance to opportunistic distance. Every political party, for opportunistic reasons, decides when to intervene and when not to intervene. Whenever it benefits, it intervenes. Whenever it benefits not to intervene, it doesn't intervene. So principle and critical respect, the critique part is gone. It's only respect, and respect is hierarchical respect. So basically what is happening is reverence for one religion promoted by one political party, and we are sometimes thinking that that is secular. ये हमारा सेकुलरिज्म है, हम सेकुलर हैं, पर हम क्या कर रहे हैं? एक रिलीजन को हम पता नहीं कहां पर ले जा रहे हैं, उसकी बुराइयां अच्छाइयां सबके साथ। वो क्रिटिकल रिस्पेक्ट कहां गया? वो प्रिंसिपल डिस्टेंस कहां गया? वो इक्वल प्रिंसिपल डिस्टेंस फ्रॉम ऑल रिलीजन्स वो कहां गया? So we have reduced constitutional secularism. It's still there in the courts sometime, constitutional secularism, but I really don't know why it is not theorized better. I'd like to see. I personally know. Let's not go there about my courts and law schools and judges and so on. But I'd really like people to reflect on this and use it. Please disassociate. You know, once I was asked to write, and I'll stop there. I was asked to write for NCRT. My old student and who came and lectured here, Yogendra Yadav, he was heading the NCRT in 2006-07, and he asked me to write something on the Constitution and something on secularism for school text. And there were members of the committee, in some other members, and I very honestly felt that the briefest way to describe secularism is principal distance. But there was some objection by people that ये तो अपना idea use कर रहा है, ये propagate कर रहा है. तो अब इसके बारे में तो मैं कुछ नहीं कह सकता कि अपना आइडिया है कि मेरे को उससे डिसोसिएट कर दीजिए. आप आइडिया के बारे में सोचिए. अगर वो आइडिया ठीक है, किसी और तरह एक्सपेक्ट करते तो और कर दीजिए. But there are a lot of very wise people who are not very unhappy with the idea, and they are very happy to use it, but they all live abroad. And India के अंदर थोड़ा ज़्यादा तवज्जो दीजिए. ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है. किसी हिंदुस्तानी ने करा है तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि वो ठीक नहीं है. कॉन्फ्रेंस ले, कॉलोनियलिज्म हैंगओवर को निकालिए, हम भी कुछ कर सकते हैं. थैंक यू.
So those of you who have questions, please raise your hands. I'll come to you. And please stay till the end of the Q&A. I'll take the attendance of third years after that.
It'll be nice if you actually say who you are and what you do.
Yes. Good evening, sir. I'm Bhavesh, and I'm in the second year, sir. So firstly, I wanted to say thank you for because over the past 2 lectures that I've been hearing and today's lecture also, I got this feeling that the major emphasis of the lecture was on a political secularism, where how the state is supposed to enact its secularism. And I had actually planned on asking this question that, sir, I was feeling that dissonance, that the secularism that we are seeing amongst the people right now and the secularism that the state is supposed to expound is at a dissonance where people have just rejected it. And like memes and all were coming to my head where people were referring to secularism as secularism. So all of that was coming. So I really felt so that the lecture really ended on a high where you just got us to like how we can, you know, bridge that dissonance and reconcile those differences that are there. Sir, there were some ideas that I wanted to ask you if they add to the idea that you were discussing towards the end. Sir, in our Pol Science 1 course during our first semester, we read about Ashish Nandi Anti-Secular Manifesto, where he writes about that secularism has been articulated in a way, in such a way in modern India that religion has been relegated to the private realm as something that is not supposed to be brought out publicly, as something that is banished to the private realm and is, you know, udhar hi rehna chahiye, uske bahar zyada nahi aana chahiye, which has prevented dialogue between religions, and that's why we have what the rumor mongering is going on. So is that one thing that is related to your idea? Secondly, sir, today in the Indian Express, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, sir, he wrote about Rahul Gandhi bringing up the caste thing in parliament yesterday or day before about ki जो बजट का हलवा सेरेमनी था उसमें कितने दलित थे. And Pratap Bhanu Mehta sir very nicely wrote that, you know, throwing around these caste questions so randomly actually takes us away from the critical questions or engagements on castes and makes it a thing of a very random nature. and sir, also you talked about the discourse mongering thing that happens. I remember reading an article or a chapter in a book from Arif Muhammad Khan where he wrote about how we learn about Renaissance in our schools today, but we don't learn about how the Renaissance took its inspiration from the golden age of Islam in Saudi and made it. Then this knowledge was carried by the Europeans to the Europe. So in that way, because that dialogue is missing and the way things are being presented to us, we don't have an, like, Islam is shown very narrowly then. So sir, do these ideas relate to your
Absolutely.
to your,
Each
yes,
one does.
and
So I'll take the fourth later. Otherwise, I'll forget all the three. My memory has become very.
so small question, sir.
You can take it. I mean, I'm willing. I'm even today.
Sorry,
Anyway,
sorry.
you can ask 4, 5, 6, and if you not you're not able to express it now, we can do it privately.
Sure,
But
sir.
let me answer the first three. First of all, thank you. I've actually talked about political secularism only because because we have something. The state exists. It's not going to disappear, and we need. There's a lot of public power. It makes a difference, and it's what stand it takes is crucial. And by the state, I mean a whole lot of institutions, not only the government, which is currently in power, but also the parliament. We know executive. But the judiciary which is an arm of the state, and the police, which is both in the hands of the government and also under the control of the judiciary. So all of this for me is part of the state. And I believe a democratic state is even more than just the state institutions, because there is a public sphere which is checking, not just checking, influencing and shaping the state. It is a state has to respond to society, to people, to civil society, and not to forget the media. Now, if the media is captured by the state, then it becomes just an arm of the state. But if an independent media in a democracy, it's a link between people and the state. It is supposed to function like that. It's supposed to question, check, and make the government more transparent. If it stops doing that, it's another matter. But it's all these institutions, everybody, we are all, as citizens, we are citizens of the state. We also have a stake in the state. We are the state also, right? So when I talk about the state, I'm talking about the democratic state, and I'm including all of this. So political secularism is not authoritarian, right, in my understanding. We're talking about the state in which we are important stakeholders, not even as individuals, not just members of civil society, members of judiciary, members of the media. I mean, every institution is publicly funded. You and I are sitting over here, and we have a relationship to the state, and an integral relationship with the state, right? We are entitled to these resources. We pay our taxes to the state. The state is our state. Why is it captured by a few people? It's our state. We are not living in a monarchy. Monarchy के अंदर एक बंदे का state होता है. Monarchy. We are demosarchy, right? People. So I look at the state very differently. But actually, independent of that, I see political secularism as part of a critical social perspective. And I'd like critical respect to be a very important part of critical social. So anyway, I can go on and on, but I'll stop. But let's take the other three. Let me, as I remember, Ashish. Ashish, it's not very clear whether he's describing our society in his understanding of a secular society, or he's actually saying that we practice secularism in that way. The Constitution, I'm a very close friend of Ashish now. We've been in the same institution. We're retired from the same institution, and we meet very often. He is among three people. I have to say, it is some personal. I was a critic of Ashish Nandi and T.N. Madan. I remain so. But these are two people who are responsible for getting me to CSTS. So there is a very healthy understanding between us. We're not hostile to each other. We are very respectful. But I have a critical respect towards Ashish Nandi. Right? So we don't agree on that. Now, I don't know. I keep telling him, did you read the Constitution before you wrote secularism, your anti-secular manifesto? You've taken a Western idea of secularism, not only the Western, but the French idea of secularism. Religion को प्राइवेटाइज कर दो. कहाँ प्राइवेटाइज होता है हिंदुस्तान में? हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अंदर we are recognizing religious communities, we fund religion, we help religion, we aid Kumbh Mela, we do all sorts of things. हम लोग ने प्राइवेटाइज कब किया भाई religion को? It is an idea in the hands of in the heads of some people. Why do you take it as representative of Indian elites in general? And certainly the Indian people in general. And certainly it is not even it's not even constitutional. Is there anywhere in the Constitution where it says that religion has to be privatized? Is there any article? It's saying we publicly recognize religions. We are funding religions. Which secularism? So he also is confusing communal and communitarian. He is doing all sorts of things which he should not be doing. And I've been asking, write a piece on secular to clarify your views. He doesn't do that. T.N. Madan is also a very close friend of mine. He's 93, very old. Recently met him, and he's good and fine, very sharp. He rewrote his piece. He wrote a book in which he responded to my criticism. But there are very few Indian scholars who respond. They don't revise their views. उन्होंने कह दिया तो कह दिया. मैंने कह दिया, बस. अब वो फ्लोट करेगा. हमेशा के लिए फ्लोट करेगा. लेकिन पीछे मैंने गलती करी, मैंने ये किया, मैं रिवाइज करूंगा, ये नहीं होता. बहुत कम होता है. तो ये तो आशीष नंदी साहब के बारे में है, जो मेरे बहुत प्यारे दोस्त हैं, लेकिन पब्लिकली हम डिसएग्री भी करते हैं. अब दो और क्वेश्चन थे ना आपके, which were they? I've forgotten those three. If you just remind me quickly.
So the Pratap Bhanu
Pratap, and then there was the Islam.
the Golden
Arif
Age.
Muhammad Khan is also a very strange person, but I won't get into the personal qualities of Arif Muhammad Khan, but he was an interesting man. He may be still an interesting person. Just 5 years ago, we were on the same platform, and we were virtually taking a very similar position. This was in Chennai, in the Hindu huddle, it's called. It was and we were part of the same panel, and on some issues we were agreeing on everything. So anyway, I won't comment on the rest of it. I would totally agree with the point of view that he expressed. This is not just our problem. It's a Western problem, which we have inherited for what reason, I don't know. The West doesn't acknowledge the contribution of Islam to its heritage. That's a very, very unfortunate thing. It's not that nobody does it. A lot of scholars who do it, but in public, it's not important. It's not, it's relegated to not only the background, but it's erased. And I think that there is nothing in the world which is the contribution of a single culture. There is a contribution of many cultures in everything. Don't think that India has no contribution to make to Western liberalism. Liberalism is not Western. The current formulation of Western, which is the current formulation of liberalism, that is hegemonic, that is Western. The word liberal is Western, meaning English. But the ideas of which are there in a liberal outlook are not Western alone. They are very much a part of our heritage too, in a slightly different form, not in exactly the same way, but they are. Reclaim that, and you will get. Tomorrow, I'm talking about the roots of democratic pluralism. I will then talk about these things. So I think I've answered the three questions.
Good evening, sir. I'm Rashika from the 5th year. First of all, it's a massive privilege to see you and hear from you. We've heard about
Thank
you in our classes. I'll keep my question short. We studied about, when we were studying the ideas of secularism in Constitutional Law 1, there was one idea, equal respect secularism, that was put down. And you were introduced to us as the critique of it, where you say, we were told that you say that equal respect secularism is not the correct term to be used. From your lecture, I've gathered that whatever I've gathered from your lecture, I believe you do believe in equal respect secularism. So has your position changed, or I never understood it correctly to begin with?
No, it's not equidistance also. That's also not my view. But if it said equidistance, yeah, okay. I'll talk about both very quickly. Yeah. Any other?
No, sir. That's all.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I'm equal critical respect. So equal respect. If respect involves critique, then equal, and not equidistance, but principal distance, which allows for intervention in one religion more than others, if that religion requires that intervention and the other religion doesn't. Supposing, I'm only asking you to suppose, supposing in doctrinal terms, Christianity and Islam do not have caste inequalities. In reality, they do, right? So if we want to intervene in intra-religious domination, when it comes to caste issues, then it may seem as if we have to intervene more in Hindu than in Islam or Christianity, right? As a matter of fact, Indian Constitution doesn't recognize that caste is present in these religions. Therefore, until we came to there are so many scheduled castes among Sikhs. There are more scheduled castes in Sikhs in Punjab than there are in Hindus in Punjab. Okay? But we have no provisions for scheduled castes among, Sikhs there are, because they are seen to be part of Hindus. But if there are Dalit Christians in Punjab, there will be no opportunities, special opportunities for them, no reservations for them. That's wrong. But it's also, in a sense, right, because Christians don't recognize caste. So we have to look at the practice of Christianity rather than go to the doctrine. And if we went only by the doctrine, then we are the state is right to intervene more in Hinduism than in Christianity. So it leaves Christians alone, but it intervenes in Hinduism. But so this is not it's more towards one. Now, these provisions which are given to for educational institutions, it appears to be helping minorities more than it is. But there is a background assumption. The assumption is that Hindus don't need help. Why would a majority need any help? You look at various institutions. I don't want to ask this question, which is going to be like Rahul Gandhi asking, "Aapki caste kya hai?" But अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं कि आपका रिलीजन क्या है, तो यहाँ पर जितने लोग बैठे हैं, उसमें से मुझे 3-4 लोग मिलेंगे, शायद वो मुस्लिम हैं। अगर आपको पता है, मैं पूछूंगा नहीं ये सवाल। अब इसके अंदर आप कहें कि हिंदूज के लिए कुछ आप एडमिशंस के अंदर जरा कुछ सीट्स रिजर्व कर दीजिए, तो ये एक अजीब बात होगी। जो ऑटोमेटिकली ज्यादा हिंदू आते हैं भाई, मुसलमान अगर कम आते हैं तो उनके लिए 2-4 कर दो, क्योंकि आपको if Muslims are legally educated, it will be very good for the country. So give them some, उनको दे दीजिए ना कुछ सीटें, वो नहीं आ रहे for whatever reason. तो ये अब आप उसको कहेंगे तो माइनॉरिटी अपीसमेंट हो रहा है. माइनॉरिटी अपीसमेंट नहीं है, ये इक्वालिटी प्रोविजंस का इंप्लीमेंटेशन है. अभी मैं पूछूं यहां से, मैं नहीं पूछूंगा, राहुल गांधी पॉलिटिशियन है, आपने वो सवाल भी पूछा था, हाँ, जिसका मैंने जवाब नहीं दिया. राहुल गांधी ने बोल दिया, but he was talking about under representation of certain castes in the making of the budget. He was not asking in questions कि तुम्हारी कास्ट क्या है, तुम्हारी कास्ट क्या है. I don't think that was the intention. Pratap, I disagree with Pratap. He's converted into a question कि वो हर अपनी सब कास्ट लेके घूमे. That is not the intention of Mr. Rahul Gandhi. He's seeing the policy formation is largely done by upper castes who benefit from it. Where are the Dalits in it? Where are the minorities in it? How will people develop a stake in that policy if they are not part of it? And why will other people think of you? Today, people blatantly say, if you don't give votes to us, why should you do anything for you? It's absurd in a democracy for people to say something like that. You are elected by, this is a democracy. You are elected by, obviously you'll be elected by majority of people, and minorities obviously have a minority, meaning minority population, not religious minorities. Minorities haven't voted for you. You have won because a majority people voted for you. Let's say 40% people voted for you. But others didn't vote for you. That means you will not work for them. What a crazy idea. Matlab, if I am made the vice chancellor by a certain group, I'll only work for that group. I will not work for the entire students. What the hell? It's a crazy idea. You are serving the entire university. You're not serving one section of the people. You can't discriminate because उसने मुझे दिया, उसने मुझे सपोर्ट किया, इसने मुझे सपोर्ट नहीं किया. फिर इलेक्शन ही नहीं होंगे, क्योंकि सबको पता है कि तुमने उसको वोट दिया, उसको वोट नहीं दिया. तो फिर बेवकूफी है, बिल्कुल गलत बात है. बट अगर ये किसी ने बोला कि बजट के अंदर लोग कुछ है ही नहीं जो बजट बनाते हैं, सारा बजट तो फिर उनको ही, जिनका इंटरेस्ट है उनको सर्व कर रहा है, तो कोई गलत बात नहीं करी. उसमें किसी को ये नहीं पूछा कि आपकी कास्ट क्या है, आपकी कास्ट क्या है. सॉरी, आई डोंट एग्री विद मिस्टर माधुम, who is also, by the way, you know, anyway, obviously I know him very well. He's That is a different issue. वो उसने काउंटर किया है ये. Somebody is asking his caste. Yeah, this is a complete distortion. And I mean, look, this is an issue which is delicate. That I agree with. The political rhetoric around this should be very careful. But people have to raise it. You can't not raise this issue because it's delicate. You can do it in a more sophisticated manner. But you see, if you're a popular rhetoric के अंदर अगर पार्लियामेंट जब टेलीवाइज होती है तो वो एक पब्लिक डिस्कोर्स बनता है, and there you become a little crude. I'm not excusing. I still want Rahul Gandhi to be more careful about when you raise issues of religion and caste. These are very deep issues and very divisive issues. You have to be careful. So there I agree with Pratap. But I don't think the example that he took was a good example of what was happening there. Underrepresentation of people in institutions is a very big problem in India. Certain sections are simply not visible. If Mandal did not happen, there will only be upper caste people everywhere. And believe it or not, I can tell you from my own experience, because initially even I was a little, this is 1990 or whatever. There was both Tani has been mentioned a couple of times. Tani and I have a friend, unfortunately he's passed away. You won't even know him, you were probably not born. But he was a very major, he was the person who started the Hindi unit of India today. Aaj tak, that name is given by this guy. Surinder Pratap Singh, I want to remember him today. S.P. Singh, he was the editor of Ravivar, which is Sunday magazine used to be brought out. And he was the person who founded the Hindi, who was in charge of the Hindi at that time. Mandal, when Mandal was going on, we were very good friends. So we kind of said, yeah, I'm not very sure. This is giving a little more, typical, upper caste response. This is making caste too visible. And caste, sab jagah caste ho raha hai. Ye to theek nahi hai. So he asked Tani and I, he said, I'm going to bring the Mandal Commission report. You look at it and find a name which you are familiar with. So there were about 1,000 castes mentioned, all part of OBCs. By the way, one colleague of mine from the center, Dhirubhai Sheth, was a member of that commission. And believe it or not, there was not a single person and then I looked around. All people who were my doctors, my lawyers, everybody was only from the three top, upper castes. They were either Brahmins or Rajputs or, Thakurs, Kshatriyas, or they were Vaishyas, Banyas. There was not a single OBC in their entire list, our schools didn't have, the judiciary didn't have, the administration, there was not a single name. वो caste name उनका जो है, कोई था ही नहीं. Public visibility थी नहीं, उनको jobs नहीं थे. Imagine that is a majority of the population of India. 50 to 55% of the population of India is OBC. 15% is Dalits and 7.5% is ST. That is a little, 60%, 60. Then you have minorities. If you really look at the upper caste, that's about 10%, 11%, I don't know the figure. Caste census will tell us, but I don't know. It's very tiny. So it's not that we should have discrimination against such people, but I think we should have a perspective. If the nation truly belongs to everybody, then we should ask if the resources of the nation, which includes all the jobs, whether they're truly distributed or they're completely skewed in favor of one group. There has to be some, otherwise there will be a social revolution. You cannot keep people out for too long if you call yourself a democratic society. मत बोलिए अपने आप को democracy, but फिर भी popular rebellions होंगे. So this reservation with pressure cooker के ऊपर एक जो steam को नीचे seal करने का तरीका है, gradual incremental है, non-violent way of improving the lot of everybody. Please see it like that. Treat it as a sociological phenomena. And if you call yourself a community, a little bit of sacrifice on the part of the privileged is part of the game. You can't be calling yourself a community and have everybody taking care only of your interest. Then you have to take care of the interests of the other. Who are the people who are fighting the real battle in our defense forces? They're all OBCs. वो जवान, हम उनको जवान कहते हैं, पेजेंट्स बोलते हैं, पर उनकी अगर कास्ट देखी जाए तो सब के सब वो अपनी जान देने के लिए आप तैयार हैं। बहुत बात करते हैं लोग आपके लिए, तो आप उनको कुछ और देने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, क्या मतलब है? आप जाइए ना, जब बनिए, अपनी जान दीजिए ना वहां जाके बॉर्डर पर। कितने लोग मरते रहते हैं, उनके नाम जरा देखिए। तो ये हम लोगों को ये चीजें, हम particularly people like us who have been very fortunate to get the right kind of training and education, we should be able to think about these things. We should, and anyway, I'll stop here. Yeah.
All right. So my name is Ishan Podar. I'm a third year LLB student. So my question is the entire discussion and discourse on secularism. Could I apply that, the frameworks, the critiques, to the linguistic issue in India? Because in India, language identities also are that have that level of emotional attachment that religious identities do.
Yeah.
And they are also at some level fighting for a dominant position within the geography and the political system. So could the debate and discourse on secularism, how the law treats it and otherwise, be applied to linguistic identities to
Yes.
deal with solutions and frameworks for that?
Yes, a lot can be. A lot of it can be. First of all, the equality provisions and freedom to speak your own language is part of the Constitution. We cannot discriminate on the basis of language, just as you cannot discriminate on the flavor of it. Okay? One, let me complete. Then all issues, educational institutions are not just for religious, but also for linguistic minorities. Articles 26 to 30, they're not only about religious institutions, not all, but many of them are about educational institutions. That's all. But we have more than that. Not in law, but we haven't written it down, but in practice, the moment we formed states on a linguistic basis in 1950, from 1956 onwards, our federalism is actually language-based. I've written on this in 2, 3, 4 articles, including there's a book which is now going to be reprinted. I'm very sorry that it wasn't, but others must have written it. I'm not the only one. I'm not an expert in this, but I was compelled to write on these issues. I call it linguistic federalism. India is a linguist, which means that in India, we have more than linguistic communities get more than even religious communities. They are given self-governing rights. Tamils have their own Tamil, Marathas have, Gujaratis have Gujarat, Marathas have Maharashtra, Andhras, Telugu speakers now have two, but Kannada have their Karnataka, Kerala is Malayalam, and Hindi is for, a lot of Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, are actually different languages, really, but they're all put together as one. So, yeah, Kashmir, Jammu, Dogra. So there are how many official languages there are? Many, 20, whatever. But there are linguistic states. And so de facto, we recognize not only minority rights in terms of educational institutions, we have linguistic rights given to people to govern themselves, so relatively independently. Now, again, the federal structure is in deep crisis today, right? And we are talking about increasing divide between the South and the North. That South is actually a mixture of many linguistic states, and they're non-Hindi speaking. And we have to be careful about how much alienation we're prepared to inject into the system among the Southern people who feel left out many times. Paradoxically, most of these states are predominantly Hindu states. The majority, and they are in many ways better Hindus. than North Indian Hindus. That's a very stupid statement. I take that back. But in some ways, I mean, in the sense that they are, but not to speak of caste, which is, they've been fighting caste for a long time. I mean, the social reform movements in the South are much stronger than they have been in the North. North, it started with Mandal. South, it started much earlier. So they have been critical. They have critical respect for their own religion for a much longer period. But there is a certain bias in the system towards the northern states, and there is but yeah, I mean, the framework of secularism is applicable to a large extent to federalism and to linguistic rights of minorities and so on. So yeah, yeah, the link is very strong.
Okay, so if you can raise your voice, then it's fine.
Hi. Party political. Actually, it's political secularism, and political secularism is largely found in what I call constitutional secularism, because it's to do with state, democratic state, and its relationship to religion is what you find in the Constitution. But but the larger idea is political state and its relationship to religion for the sake of certain values is the conceptual structure of political secularism. I talked about it yesterday. And insofar as it is all inscribed or enshrined in the Constitution, it becomes constitutional secularism, right? So the legal formulation of it is found in the Constitution, but people have forgotten that, and it becomes, different parties relating to religion, and in an opportunistic manner. And values are not anymore in mind, it's their private benefit, electoral benefit. So they are not separating themselves from religion, they use religion. Sometimes benefit, sometimes inhibit, all for the sake of their own personal, collective electoral benefit of the party or individuals. So that I call party political secularism. It's not political, as distinguished from political secularism, which is a value-based idea. This is not a value-based idea, it's just my benefit. So religion is being instrumentally used for opportunistic purposes, right? All parties have done it, but they've done it with all religions. Now we have a party which does it with one religion against others.
So in case anybody has any more questions or want to engage with Professor Bhargava, so he's very much willing to do so. So after the lecture, you can accompany him till the CC. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in here. And I thank our speaker, Professor Bhargava, the faculty members present here. And ma'am, I also thank you for being here. And in case you have a question, you can ask. So thank you so much. And third years, please wait for a while. I'll just take up your attendance.
Can I get a sign?
Yeah, sure.
Rashika. R-A-S-H-I-K. S-H-I-K.
Sir, see you in the morning. I'll be there. Probably I'll be joining you for the breakfast or something.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here. We've studied you in many classes.
It's always nice to hear, some collaboration all the time.
And sir, It's very good that earlier we had Mr. Yogendra Yadav speak, and now we get to see you as well. So it's like it truly feels we are blessed here. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm so glad. Yeah, thanks.
I was extremely surprised. I got to know that you are the father of Nanny ma'am.
Yeah.
I was in touch with her for 2 months, and just for 2 days she let me know that
Oh.
you're a father.
Oh,
So,
God.
yeah,
What's her name?
I'm Hamza.
Hamza.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, she mentioned. She mentioned. So where are you now?
I'm here only. I'm a third year
You're
student.
30, right?
Yes.
I think my daughter Banya is also an academic. Banya is joining National Law School as an academic.
Oh, which law school? And
Bangalore. She's joining on the 1st of November. So she's going to be teaching history there. She's permanent faculty.
I just had a small question. From an atheist point of view, it has always been raised about why we give a higher pedestal to religion than we give to any other kind of ideology. For example, when we criticize a political ideology, nobody makes it mandatory that we respect the ideology along with criticizing it. So, for example, there is no principle as equal critical respect of political ideology. A person may go all blunt against maybe the right wing or the left wing. It would all be perceived as fine. However, when it comes to religions, why do we always deem it necessary to give respect to the religions themselves? I do not say that people who are following the religions should not be respected. The people should be respected as human beings the way they are. But why should an atheist, for example,
I think, yeah, I mean, I think I would say two things. I think before we criticize anything, we should understand. And then if you find nothing, then you go ahead and be uninhibited. My feeling is that you find something to respect in everyone. Something, not maybe to a less degree. But that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is just it's a majoritarian inheritance. You see, we are still dominated by this. And funnily, this radicalization has grown in non-Western society, both in the Middle East and in India. Radicalization has grown in